Today, we are looking at a ton of different agaves, and there's a bunch of different varieties of agaves, all right? So the question is, which one do you select for your landscape? I'm gonna break it down for you guys in this video, and I'm gonna tell you guys which one is my go-to agave and why. So let's go. So there are hundreds of different species of agaves. Some are great for culinary uses like sweeteners and syrups, and yes, adult beverages. Many are grown for ornamental uses in the landscape because of their beautiful, dramatic foliage. Agaves will come in all shapes and sizes. They'll have different colors. Blooms will be different heights, and by the way, most agaves are monocarpic, meaning they will bloom just once and then the parent plant dies off. The foliage and structure can range dramatically, so it can get a little bit overwhelming when you're trying to figure out, which one is gonna work for you. I'm gonna try to alleviate that for you guys and help you think a little bit more about the design uses and break down a few of these simple characteristics. All right, the first one we're gonna take a look at here is Agave Geminiflora or twin-flowered agave. This agave is hardy down to about 30 degrees Fahrenheit. It's only gonna get about 3 feet tall by about 2.5 to 3 feet wide. So it's really ideal for those smaller garden spaces. If you look up closely at the foliage, it has a very fine silvery colored hair to it. It's really gorgeous. Now, some people do trim off the very sharp ends of those terminal spines. Just be aware of planting it in close proximity to human interaction spaces like patios and walkways. So the positives, a smaller, more compact agave, great for small spaces. The negatives, it does have that very sharp terminal spine. All right, let's go to the next one. Next up is Agave Perii variety truncata, commonly known as Artichoke Agave. It stays even a little smaller than the twin-flowered agave, about 2 to 3 feet tall by about 3 feet wide. The foliage color on the Artichoke Agave is absolutely breathtaking with its incredible blue, grayish, almost silvery colored foliage. The rosette is tight and symmetrical and stays very uniform, and you won't have that unruly growth that gets unpredictable and wild like some agaves do. I really like to use the Artichoke Agave with other bold, colored succulents and cacti like barrel cactus, different kinds of sedums, aeoniums, anything to just create a massive color contrast. Because of its small stature, it's great for smaller spaces like courtyards. Use it in coastal gardens, rock gardens, and the Artichoke Agave will produce pups at the base. The positives, small and compact with incredible foliage color. It will attract hummingbirds and is deer resistant. Negatives, again, that sharp terminal spine. Just be conscious of where you're planting it. Now, if you are really pressed for space, we're gonna go down in scale even further to the Queen Victoria Agave. This is an incredible little compact growing agave that is so unique. It's only gonna get a foot high by about 2 feet wide. And because of its small stature, it does great in tight spaces, courtyards, and can even be used in pots. The leaves are a beautiful deep green that have an incredible bright white contrasting edge. You can plant this agave in sun or shade. Now, even though the agave is very small, it can produce a bloom up to about 15 feet. And the terminal spines are very small in this, so there's much less of a concern. But again, it does have some toxins to it. Positives can go in those small and compact spaces. The negatives, it's actually a very slow grower, so you'll have a long time to wait until it reaches full maturity. I cannot say enough wonderful things about Agave Blueglow, and it does just as the name suggests. It almost appears to be glowing with that beautiful red striped margin, and that just contrasts so well with the blue-green leaves that have almost kind of a chalky finish to it. The growth habit is very predictable. The rosette stays nice and neat and symmetrical. It'll take full sun and very drought tolerant once established. It makes such an incredible focal point when used with other contrasting shrubs, cacti, and perennials. I'm telling you, this agave will not disappoint. Now, this also stays relatively small. It's only gonna get about 2 feet tall by about 2 to 3 feet wide. So again, it can go in those smaller spaces. And don't worry, we're gonna hit some larger growing agaves in just a minute. Now, like some of the others, it does have a very sharp terminal spine, so be conscious of where you wanna use it. But I do see this a lot in those smaller spaces like courtyards, and I've even seen this used in pots, and it looks absolutely incredible. And it's very cross-stylistic, anything from Southwestern to modern. The positives, compact and symmetrical, very easy to grow. The negatives, again, that terminal spine, you have to be conscious of where it's gonna go. Agave Attenuata, or foxtail agave, is one of the most popular agaves, especially here in Southern California. The rosette has bold lime green leaves with a beautiful central cone. Really creates a wonderful accent point because of its bold foliage. It looks really dynamic when used with other finer textured plants. It's hardy down to about 30 degrees Fahrenheit and is native to Mexico. Now, this agave gets its name from the beautiful arching bloom that kind of looks like a tail coming up out of the center of the rosette. Such a show-stopping feature of this agave. Now, one thing to note is these leaves are very fleshy and flexible and do not have a sharp terminal spine. So that is major points for this agave, no pun intended. This agave can go in sun or shade, and it does like a little bit of protection from hot afternoon sun, especially in inland climates. These agaves do form trunks that will reach and spread and create pretty large clumps. As it clumps out, the foliage can reach up to about 5 feet tall and get up to about 8 feet wide. And because of that attribute, it does generally require a little bit more maintenance than some of the other agaves. Now, some people do opt to pull the pups off the base and keep it as a single specimen rosette. Plant these agaves in courtyards, coastal settings, in gravel and rock gardens, and because of their clumping effect, they are more suitable for informal kinds of landscapes. The positives: this agave is easy to grow, deer tolerant, drought tolerant, and does not have a sharp terminal spine. The negatives may require a bit more maintenance because of the multiple rosettes and mound that it forms. And again, just to note, like most agaves, it does have a level of toxin to it. Agave Blue Flame is another one of my favorites, and it's actually very similar to Agave Attenuata, but if you look carefully, the foliage has a little bit more of a blue tinge, as suggested in the name, and the margins have a very fine serration on them. But the serrations are so small, they're fairly benign. It's generally not as scary as some of the other agave terminal spines because the leaves are very flexible. It's going to be hardy down to about 30 degrees Fahrenheit, can be planted in full sun to part shade, and is native to Mexico. And like the other agaves we're talking about, can thrive on very little supplemental water. Now, like the Agave Attenuata, in hotter climates, it does like to be protected from hot afternoon sun to prevent scorching and tip burn. And it's only going to get about 3 feet tall by about 4 feet wide. So like some of these other medium to small agaves, they go great in courtyards and smaller spaces, use them in rock gardens and informal Mediterranean. And because this agave grows fairly symmetrical and predictable, I can see it in modern settings as well. And feel free to mix and match other succulents and cacti to create a super vibrant contrast. That's what makes the landscape interesting. Now, the Blue Flame will produce pups at the base, so if you want that single specimen look, feel free to just pull them off and keep it looking nice and clean. Or if you do like that multiple rosette look, just make sure you give it that space. The positives: soft, fleshy leaves, so you really don't have to worry about that terminal spine. Drought tolerant, easy to grow. The negatives: it may require a little bit more maintenance than some of the other agaves because it does form clumps and you might have to keep those maintained every so often. Now, finally on to a big boy. The Century plant is one of the largest available agaves and can reach up to about 8 feet tall by about 8 to 10 feet wide. This one needs some breathing space. This is one of those agaves that might look so cute and petite at the nursery in a nice little 1-gallon pot. You get it home and a few years later, boom, it turns into this unruly monster. And although it does take up a ton of room, it's got some fantastic ornamental qualities to it. It's got an incredibly bold texture and such a striking blue-gray leaf color. Now, it does have very sharp serrated margins, so be careful of this. It's not an easy feat to get in there and prune those lower leaves out. You can plant this agave in full sun to light shade. It is very drought tolerant once established, and also deer and salt tolerant, so it can take some coastal conditions as well. And honestly, quite a bit of neglect. It looks fantastic in southwestern and Mediterranean gardens. Use it in conjunction with other agaves, cacti, and succulents. Feel free to just mix and match those textures to create a gorgeous focal point. And that's what this Century plant does the best: create grand, epic focal points. Now, the bloom spike on this is absolutely incredible. It can get up to about 30 feet or more. And once again, it is monocarpic, so the main rosette will die off. Now, the Century plant can come variegated as well. It has a beautiful yellow stripe along each margin that contrasts so well with the blue color of the leaf. And for the most part, it has the same growth characteristics, so it really depends on the color combinations that you want to see in your landscape. If the variegation adds another dimension of contrast for you, then go with that one. Or if you like the simplicity of just that brilliant blue-gray tone, then go with the straight Agave Americana. Positives, it creates a beautiful, bold focal point, very easy to grow and nearly disease-free. The negatives, it gets massive with a very sharp terminal spine and serrations on the margins, so be careful. Now we're gonna go back down in scale a little bit and talk about the Caribbean agave. This is considered a medium-sized agave at 3 to 4 feet tall by about 3 to 4 feet wide. You can see it's got a beautiful creamy white variegation to the leaves. The rosette stays very dense, and in its maturity, it's almost a perfect sphere. So it's very predictable in its growth habit. And I like predictable in my designs. I know exactly what it's gonna do, how big it's gonna get, and what space it's appropriate for. That's so key to understand the mature height and width of whatever plant you're going to use. And like our other agaves, it's going to be a long time before it blooms, about 10 years. Now these plants stay mostly as a single specimen, but can form some pups at the base. The Caribbean agave will do best in full sun to light shade. It's very drought tolerant once it's established and is native to Mexico. The positives, it can be used in small spaces and has beautiful foliage. The negatives, a sharp terminal spine and serrated margins. We are looking at another Agave Americana, but variety Mediopicta alba. And it does have very similar growth habits, but it does stay a little bit smaller. It'll get only about 4 feet tall by about 5, maybe 6 feet wide in its maturity. And it has that bold, variegated center stripe to it, which makes it such a striking accent in the landscape. Now looking up close, this also does have spines on the margins and a very long pointed terminal spine at the end. So just the same as Agave Americanas. But if you like the look of the Century plant but need a slightly scaled down version, this would be the one to use. And again, monocarpic, the parent plant will die after the bloom. But this plant does produce pups at the base, so you can pull those pups off, replant them, and all of a sudden you have a new plant in your garden. This agave is also great for hillsides, takes very little to zero supplemental water once established, depending on your region. It's hardy down to about 15 to 20 degrees Fahrenheit and is native to North America. In terms of the larger growing agaves, it's a little bit more tame than the straight species. The positives, has striking variegated foliage and a beautiful upright growth, and it's also deer tolerant and seacoast tolerant as well. Negatives, again, a sharp terminal spine and serrated margins. Agave Wilmeriana, or octopus agave, is very aptly named for its crazy looking leaves that resemble legs of an octopus. It makes such a striking appearance in the garden all by itself because of its incredibly unique form. And as wild as this plant looks, it actually doesn't get too unruly. It only gets to about 4 to 5 feet tall by about 4 to 5 feet wide. The leaves are flexible and fleshy, so you don't really have to worry about the terminal spine on this one. All in all, this is a fairly safe plant to use adjacent to walkways and patio spaces. And after about 6 to 10 years, it will send up a beautiful flower spike about 15 to 20 feet tall. It's extremely drought tolerant, deer tolerant, seacoast tolerant, hardy down to about 25 degrees Fahrenheit, and is native to Mexico. Plant this agave in full sun to light shade. Now this agave will stay as a single specimen and not produce pups at the base, but it does produce plantlets along the bloom spike, and you can harvest those and replant them. This agave looks phenomenal in informal Mediterranean and southwestern gardens. Positives, incredibly dramatic leaf structure and fairly safe. Negatives, not many negatives on this one to be honest, but I would say maybe the unpredictable growth structure. Agave des Metiana Variegata is a fantastic agave. It's got a pretty symmetrical and predictable growth to it, and it's about medium size. It's only gonna get about 3 feet tall by about 4 feet wide. The foliage on this agave is really beautiful. It's a bright limey green with a really nice contrasting yellow variegation along the margins. Now, although this agave does have a sharp terminal spine, it really does not have spines along the margins. So that is a bonus right there. But that terminal spine can definitely get you. Now, this agave, unlike some of the other ones that we've talked about, does grow fairly quickly and can reach maturity much faster. And it will produce lots of offsets or pups around the base. It's hardy down to about 25 degrees Fahrenheit and native to Mexico. It's tolerant of deer and coastal conditions as well. They can be planted in full sun or even part shade. And this particular agave is extremely drought tolerant. So once it's established, it requires very little to no supplemental water. And like a lot of these agaves, it has a really bold texture, so complementing them with other finer textured plants and other colored succulents just really makes it pop. It will take a long time to bloom, but when it does, the bloom spike is tall and spectacular. The positives: very easy to grow, extremely drought tolerant with beautiful foliage, virtually disease free, and the maintenance is super low. Negatives: again, it does have that sharp terminal spine like some of the agaves we've talked about here. Now, out of all the agaves that we talked about, it's not a one size fits all, but it is my go-to agave because it has so many incredible attributes to it. That is the Agave Blueglow. Incredible plant. I've used it successfully in so many landscapes. It stays neat and compact. It's predictable. It's very versatile in how you can use it. It's just all around a wonderful agave. Thank you guys for hanging out with me today and looking at all these different agaves. Hopefully it's been helpful, just getting you to think a little bit more about the space and which agaves might be right for your particular site. If you guys have not yet been to the website, go to budgetplants.com. We've got lots of plants to choose from, great place to look at plants and get ideas, and of course, so you can buy them there. I will see you on the next video, and as always, happy planting.